Hello guys, welcome to the Haunting Hub. Today's story is called The Night Shift. Suffocating with silence, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. Evan had taken the midnight shift, something he'd done 1,000 times before, but tonight felt different. The office was eerily empty, save for him. His coworkers had all gone home hours ago, leaving only a few desks lit by the glow of computer screens. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if something was pressing against him from all sides. Evan pulled his chair closer to his desk, flicking through some papers on his computer. He had to finish a report by morning, but his eyes kept darting around the room. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long in the corners. At one point, he swore he saw something move at the far end of the hall. He dismissed it. It was just his mind playing tricks on him. He'd been working late too many nights in a row. The clock ticked loudly, louder than it should have. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Every second dragging by with an unsettling weight. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake the creeping fatigue. But when he opened them again, the shadows seemed different. The corner by the printer where the hallway met the darkened conference room was now filled with an unnatural, swirling darkness. It wasn't just a shadow, it was something else, something wrong. Evan tried to focus on his computer screen, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger, like someone was standing just behind him, breathing down his neck. He whipped around, but there was nothing there. Just the faint sound of something scuttling, something moving quickly along the floor, just out of sight. His breath quickened. Just the building settling, he thought. Just the pipes. It's fine. He forced himself to focus, but the feeling wouldn't leave him. The walls seemed to close in and the air grew heavier. His heart pounded in his chest as a cold sweat broke out on his skin. Then the phone rang. Evan jumped, his pulse spiking. Who could be calling at this hour? He hesitated for a moment, but the ringing continued, sharp and insistent. He picked it up. Hello? His voice sounded foreign, strained in the stillness. No response. Hello? He repeated, his eyes scanning the room nervously. The darkness at the end of the hallway seemed to grow larger, more pronounced, as though it were reaching toward him. Then a voice, a low whisper, crackled through the line, faint but clear. You shouldn't have stayed. Evan froze, his blood turning to ice. The voice was guttural, like it had come from deep within the earth, as if it had clawed its way through the phone just to reach him. Before he could react, the phone line went dead. The screen flashed, the call ending abruptly. The air seemed to thicken, and a deep, oppressive silence followed. It was so quiet, so heavy, that Evan could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it. A figure, tall and shrouded in shadow, standing just beyond the threshold of his cubicle. It was as though it had materialized from the darkness itself. Its shape indistinct, yet there was something profoundly wrong about it. Its limbs were too long, its posture twisted at an unnatural angle. Evan's breath caught in his throat. His hands shook as he grabbed his mouse, but before he could even react, the figure moved. Not walking. It slithered. It didn't touch the ground. No, it hovered. Its limbs bending at impossible angles as it came closer, gliding toward him with unsettling speed. His vision began to blur, and his mind screamed at him to move, to run, but his body was frozen. The thing, it, stopped right next to his desk. It leaned in, its face emerging from the shadow. But it wasn't a face, it was a mask of twisted, grotesque features, a thing that should not exist. Its eyes were deep, black voids, as though it had no soul, no humanity left. And it whispered again, this time from its open, gaping mouth. You are ours now. Evan's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. His body was no longer his own. And then, reached out. Fingers, cold and clammy, touched his skin. And it was like being submerged in ice-cold water, like being dragged under, his lungs screaming for air that wouldn't come. His thoughts became fractured, disjointed, as though something was clawing its way into his mind. You are ours now. The words echoed in his skull, vibrating deep within. His fingers twitched. He looked down at them, horrified to see them twisting and contorting against his will. His hands began typing on the keyboard, even though his brain was screaming no. Words he didn't recognize appeared on the screen, sentences that made no sense at all, written in a language he couldn't understand. Your soul is ours. The darkness grew, swallowing the room. His screen blinked, then went black. Evan's vision blurred again, and when it cleared, he was no longer in his office. He stood in a place that was cold, featureless, and vast. A black void, the walls stretching infinitely in all directions. The air was thick, suffocating. The only sound was his own breath, shallow and panicked. A voice echoed from the abyss, and he understood now. It wasn't just the entity in the office that had been calling. It was something much worse, much older. And it wasn't done with him yet. You are one of us now. And Evan, lost in the blackness, could feel himself slipping, the last remnants of his will being devoured, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the thing that had taken him. His body, back in the office, still sat at his desk, fingers poised above the keyboard, typing lines of nonsense into the dark, endless night. He was no longer Evan. He was something else. And the office would never be the same again.